Sponsored by Stand Up to All Hate. Call a timeout against hate.
It's a rough watch, man.
That was a rough weekend.
Even the late games, which had all the promise in the world in the late window, not great. Like, all blowouts.
Can we be honest, too? Like, I know people are like, well, what about, like, Buffalo and Detroit? It was a great game. It was a high-scoring game. Buffalo beat the crap out of them.
Yeah.
And it took Detroit till, 12 seconds left to score a touchdown and make it a one-score game. I still can't get over the Washington-New Orleans finish. How does that happen?
Don't know.
For those who didn't see it, they basically held what should have been a running clock. Game should have run out to allow New Orleans to throw a touchdown pass in the final moments. And I'm sure, Jonas, there's some gamblers who were impacted by that.
Well, probably. I would also. Is that the make good for the blown call in the NFC title game from like 6 years ago? Is that like, hey, we're going to give
That's
an
a good question. That's a great question.
We'll give you guys another chance.
That's
here.
the weird.
LaVar, do they make makeup calls 6 years in the making?
Yes, that's what I hear. That's the going rate of the number these days.
All right,
you got to wait 6.
So we're all even now. All right, good.
And it's got to be a game that doesn't, really, I guess, really matter for the New Orleans Saints.
It feels like we've had this conversation several times throughout the course of the year that the games are bad. There's a lot of bad football teams. We were just mentioning there's a couple of bad football teams that are going to be featured later on tonight as well, too. Like, pretty soon into the season, oh, that team's not going to the playoffs and that team is. Or that team's got no shot and they're just playing for a higher draft pick and that team's looking at Super Bowl potential. Like, it feels like, and I'm an idiot because I thought when they expanded the playoffs and they added an extra team, I thought, oh man, there's going to be more teams battling it out for the bottom of the playoff standings. Instead, it's bad teams that have no hope at going to the postseason and doing anything. And I don't know what the fix is. I really don't.
I got to be honest with you. For all the crap games that, were witnessed and spectated on, I was pleasantly surprised by the Jets. They put their best foot forward. I was pleasantly surprised by the Texans because I feel like they're a fool's gold, like, top team in their division, but they seem to be improving, I guess. Yeah. I feel like that was a quality victory. How about we listen, I know it might sound funny, but the Carolina Panthers are an improving team. They've showed that, they've taken some steps forward, but Dallas made them believers that they might not be as good as they thought they were trending in the direction of being. And I'll say this. The Philadelphia game, I thought, was a very, very, very telling game because it exposed some real holes in that Pittsburgh Steelers team. And I just wonder what that represents for them moving forward. And the Buccaneers. How about the Buccaneers? Because I did not see that coming where they could actually handle a steadily improving Chargers team. I thought those games in particular, there was something to be said or something to take from it, and it might have gone beyond the realm of it being considered to be great football or entertaining football. But nonetheless, I think there were some interesting storylines coming from, yesterday's games, at least some of them.
It's a good point. I mean, it doesn't change the point of, some of these games were blowouts. But, like, for example, Tampa Bay and Los Angeles, I think for those that watched, I look at the Chargers as a potential, wild-card playoff team.
Yeah.
And I think when you looked at the Bucs where they're out in the NFC, they also look to be a team that's either winning the division or a potential, wild-card playoff team. As of right now, they're in that spot to win the NFC South, win the division. So, they should get in. They keep this going. But nonetheless, it doesn't take away from an impressive win versus another conference's potential playoff team. I think the general point as I look at this, and I feel bad because people listen out there to us right now. Like, I know a lot of people look forward to Sundays. I know a lot of people look forward to even Monday night, Thursday night, whatever it is in the NFL to have that get away from whatever else is going on in their life. Like, and I know you want us to be open and honest and tell you what we see or what we're thinking or analyze something or laugh about something else. The problem is this year has stood out. Like, we've done this show now for years together, And I can't recall another year like this where you've had this many games that have been out of reach, out of touch, where you've got teams, like the Tampa Bay Bucks, who, yes, good team, Chargers, good team, but the game just goes sideways quick and it's over. I mean, Philly, I thought, Philly and Pittsburgh is kind of in and of itself its own game to kind of discuss. I mean, yeah, Philly from wire to wire controlled that game, but I thought they were the more physical team. I didn't like the game plan for Pittsburgh. It almost felt like offensively it was like, oh, we're tougher than you. No, we're tougher than. It was like one of those things. Well, let's play this game at a phone booth. and maybe that played a role in it, why the Steelers really couldn't get much going in the first quarter, got things a little bit going in the second, but really couldn't get things going in the second half. And a lot of it came from a lot of the turnovers that put them in a decent spot. But anyway, my point is, the NFL lack of parity is real. And it's starting to play itself out to the point where if I am Roger Goodell, I've got to be honest with the owners and say, you guys might not care about this. This is a crappy product. This is hard to turn on. And I hope the NFL does this. I hope they turn on the games next weekend that are the college games in the playoff and watch that and that product as opposed to theirs, and not be all uppity, not be all high and mighty, but go, what can we do to help refresh and make this thing feel bigger and better? And I understand people are going to say, what's the college football playoff? Of course it's going to feel bigger. It's like the NFL playoffs. No. The problem right now is the regular season for college football even feels bigger and better and more exciting. There's just no buzz. I mean, I hate to keep going back to what the playoff picture is. All four teams have won their divisions in the AFC. Three of the four, or I should say there's three teams right now of the seven already locked into the playoffs. And we've got how many, 3 more weeks to go?
Right.
I mean, think about that. I'm not saying that in a perfect world, things aren't always going to end up like this. But this seems to be more of an outlier to me with the margin of victory, which, by the way, I'd love to see the NFL talk about. They usually brag about this, like, oh, man, margin of victory is like 3 points. And they'll talk about how much parity there is. There's no parity in this league right now. There's not. There's the haves and the have-nots, and there's nothing in between. And we're going to see here in the next week or so, too, as things get closer, the playoffs will further solidify themselves. And it's just going to be about seeding at that point. Like, how much can we really talk about, hey, man, the Chiefs battling for that number 1 overall AFC spot? They're 13-1. They're basically going to have it locked up if they win, one more? Maybe they got to win 2 more. But you start looking at, like, the different narratives around the NFL, what they're talking about. A lot of it has to do with already pretty much talking about the playoffs, pretty much talking about seeding. It's like some of these games you're calling, and plus, trust me, I've been there. I've called Week 17, Week 18 games. They're the teams that are completely out of it. You're talking about next year in the draft, or you're talking about teams that are already going to be in the playoffs. It's not even about the game that's going on right now. That's a bad product, man. And so I feel crappy because we were sitting here on a Monday and we're like, oh man, we can't be talking about how great the games were. And maybe you differ. Maybe people differ with how they feel about it. But when I sit there and watch it, I'm like, this is not the product that I think a lot of people hope and sign up to see. And they need to extend the offseasons. They need to allow quarterbacks to go back to quarterback school and allow these guys to have more time, not less. Because you see this product at every single level and position. It's not as good as it could be.
It's just throwing the ball. Speaking of quarterback plays, just generally speaking, I mean, some of these teams really work to establish the run. I will say that. But, I mean, you look at the low numbers. Like, I'm looking at the quarterback's numbers during these games, after these games. A lot of times their numbers are really low. And then you see high interceptions. Like, you saw multiple quarterbacks with three interceptions, 2 interceptions. I mean, it's just a lot of throwing. And it's not a physical game anymore. They're legislating the physicality of the game. They're legislating that out of it. And I just think that it's the priorities of what made football something that you wanted to watch and you wanted to see, the must-see aspects of the game. it is all riding on the quarterback's arm at this point. I mean, if we're being real about it, and that's kind of, to me, I don't know. I think that it's going to take some adapting and some adjusting to how the game is being played. Ultimately, the adaptations of how the games are being called and what's important. But yeah, I mean, I'll say this just super quick. I do believe that watching the teams that are the upper echelons teams, I think that interests me to see how it's going to match up, because I'm not certain and I'm not sure exactly who is going to be what when we come to the playoffs. There are the opportunities for some teams to reestablish some players to ultimately establish themselves right now in the National Football League.
Yeah, the playoffs I'm not worried about. And it's kind of a similar conversation the NBA has. Well, just wait till the playoffs. Like, okay, well, you got 82 games during a regular season, kind of a problem. It's all the other stuff. And I think part of the reason why people don't look and don't see the forest for the trees as far as the overall picture goes is because people view these games, and I truly believe this, in their own box. Like, they look at it and go, well, yeah, I'm not really worried about the league. I'm worried about my bet. I'm worried about fantasy football.
Team, yeah.
I'm worried about my favorite team. I'm not really worried about the overall point of it. And if you actually just take a step back like we have to, because we're not doing a local show, and you look at the entirety, you look back at all those games yesterday and you go, where was the compelling game? Like, maybe it was Washington, New Orleans, and that was because of an officiating or a time management or clock gaffe in the stadium. Like, other than that, I think people just, they view success as, did my fantasy team do well? Did my bet cash? And is my favorite team playing well? And I think favorite team is like third amongst all this. And to your point on the college football playoff that's going to be showcased later on coming up this weekend, you're going to get to see NFL games next to those on Saturday, because there's a couple of NFL games on that Saturday. We'll get more into the Kansas City Chiefs and whatever that's going to look like without Mahomes potentially not being in the lineup. But then you've also got Steelers-Ravens. So we're going to actually get to see this head-to-head against the college football playoffs. And as much of an NFL guy as I am, if you ask me right now, which one am I watching? I'm watching the playoff games. I'm watching college football. Like, it's nice to have those games there, but I just look at those as going to have a bigger impact on the totality of the sport, and they're probably going to be better matchups, to me.
Right, and again, some people are going to say, like, oh, it's an apples to oranges because it's regular season versus the playoffs, but the reality is, look at the end of the college football regular season. There was a ton of intrigue. There was a ton of great games that ultimately led to the playoffs. Like, this should be building up, not where it kind of hits its peak probably around week 10 to week 12.
And now you got to wait.
And then it kind of fizzles out.
Yeah.
Like, that's where I feel like we're at. It's like two ends of the conversation. You got teams biting for the number one overall spot in the draft, and then teams who are trying to bide for the number one spot in the playoffs.
I would argue they need less games, not more. They're talking about going to 18 games.
That's the pink elephant in the room. And Mark said it a long time ago. And granted, he was saying it about the NFL, and he should have been saying it about the NBA. But there's no way these media rights deals will involve less games, right? They've got to justify the money somehow. And so more games equals more money. But it is hurting the products of the NBA. There's no doubt. The ratings are down, 48%? Some ridiculous double-digit number this year alone. I mean, it's unwatchable. That sport's gotten worse. And I think the NFL is unfortunately allowing itself to follow suit. And because of that, it's look, I'm not saying that it's going to lose its top spot in the next year or so, but eventually it'll get to the point where if something comes around that's more exciting, and I don't know, maybe it is college football. College football continues to keep gaining. I mean, the NFL numbers, we always say keep gaining, but I also think that's a byproduct of the machine that puts that out. I mean, again, if you had a choice, like, that's probably going to be my choice this upcoming weekend, because it's kind of ho-hum, looking at the NFL at this point in the season. But at the same time, like, this has been going on the entire season. I've been saying this forever. And to me, it has more to do with guys not being as prepared because they don't do as much in the offseason with the players as they used to. And I don't know if the owners care. As long as they're cashing checks, you got private equity companies coming in paying $600 million for a 10% equity piece. I don't know that they care.
Sponsored by Stand Up to All Hate. Call a timeout against hate.